Okay, kia ora, welcome back everybody. We hope you enjoyed the Ngā Taonga special presentation in association with Doc Edge of Kupe Voyaging by the Stars. We're lucky enough to have with us now Peter Ture, the director, as well as Lawrence Wharero from Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. I'll hand over, I'll disappear, and I'll let the kōrero commence. Thanks.
Tēnā koe, Matt. Thank you very much. Peter, as a program makers and documentary makers, we're often compelled, for whatever reason, to record and tell the story. Share with us what it was that compelled you, Andy and John, to create the piece Kupe Voyaging by the Stars.
Oh, really? We'd worked with Heck before on the Mātātua waka he built in 1990, and we covered a lot of the waka that went up to Waitangi in 1990. And so we developed a relationship with Heck. So he told us about what he wanted to do and how he wanted a film made of it. And that's really what got us on board. For myself, I'd been helping Greg Whakataka Brightwell on Hawaii Nui a few years earlier. And I'd visited him in Tahiti and in Rarotonga on that voyage, which made its way back to Aotearoa. So I had a keen interest already and, of course, leapt at the opportunity. And Ian Johns had been, he's a pretty experienced producer, and he'd done a few sailing films and adventure films, I guess you could say. And so we both had interests from our own different perspectives.
What do you hope that the testament for Kupe Voyaging by the Stars might be?
Really, I really wanted to make a statement that although we hadn't practiced these things for a long time, nothing was lost to us. Everything in our traditions had been retained by us and within our own oral culture and our practices and such. And by and large, that's how it was. We needed Mau Piai Long from Satawal to come and really refurnish our skills with celestial navigation and such. But we did already have the principles down, and we already had the thinking in place. And so Mau Piai Long was able to tune us.
I mean, I guess one of the things too, ocean journeying and all that isn't an isolated thing, and it takes quite a bit of collaboration. So in the film, we see that there's Hector engaging the skill and talent of Mau Piai Long. What were some of the other collaborations that occurred during the construction of and journey?
Well, Nainua Thompson from Hawaii, who'd been a student of Mau Piai Long's for many years with the Hawaiian Voyaging Society. And so he came over, he was an experienced navigator, and he wasn't as shy as Mo. His English was a whole lot better. So he had a dynamic and a immediacy of relationship with the younger men, and was able to really channel all of that learning and experience that he had into the crew and the people who were learning from him. And when I say the crew, not everybody who was learning those skills and those wānanga and such could go on the waka. So they became standby for later voyages and such like that.
What was the crew selection process for that maiden voyage to Rarotonga?
Oh, Heck invited people from all over the motu, from every iwi. He really wanted it to be not just a taitokoro thing. He wanted to be inclusive of other iwi. He always acknowledged for his skills and knowledge of waka construction. He always acknowledged Piri Pautapu. He invited Te Ariki Nui when he launched the Mātātua too. And so Heck had a pretty broad-reaching kind of thing happening there. And so he invited people from all over the motu to come to his wānanga. And then the final selection was, of course, whoever survived the wānanga and whoever looked like they could get on with each other on a small boat for 3 weeks. And that's, that's quite a critical thing. A small boat is a small boat. You're not going to get away from anybody, and so you have to get on.
And, the construction of the waka and the team that gets built around that is only one part of the story. When you're actually on the water and you're testing those relationships, how tense did things get particularly when they were weathering the storm?
When you're weathering the storm, there's sort of not so much tension and stuff. It's really you kind of click into a little bit of a survival thing. Before the voyage, Nainoa was impressing on us about how fit we had to be. And, when you think about it, you think, well, how fit do you need to be to run around the waka? There's not that much room on it. But really the fitness told when we were weathering, unpleasant weather. I remember, even for heck, there was one time we were both kind of manning and steering, and it was night and it was in the storm, and we were sitting quite close together, and he just had a sudden projectile vomit. And without changing anything, this vomit just surged up and came out of his mouth, and it was kind of coming towards me, and I just kind of saw it, and then the wind just took it and swept it somewhere else, and so it didn't land on me at all. But so when you're in big seas like that, you're gonna chunder, you're gonna get sick, and that's when your fitness counts, because no matter how sick you are, no matter how constantly vomiting you are, you can keep going, you can keep your focus, you can not sort of dump your insecurities on the crew person next to you or anything like that. You can keep going, and that's really what the fitness is about. It's about keeping going when you're not really feeling that good at all.
I mean, those waves were huge. There's parts there where the mast of Taonga disappeared below the waves, and I'm sure the mast must be at least 12 meters high.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that question, bro.
There are shots there where the mast disappears behind waves, and the mast is at least 12 meters high. How big were those seas?
Well, it's kind of hard to say, because you get floating up and down on them, if you know what I mean, and you lose any perspective. It's not until you look at another vessel across the way that you can see exactly what you described. That mast disappears below the top of the wave, which tells you how deep the trough is. And so, yeah, I don't know how big they were, but I know, the biggest ones were really at night, so it was dark, so you couldn't tell. All you could tell was the entire length of the vessel was going down a wave, and you thought, well, okay, it's got to come up again at some stage. And so you got a sense that it was going down for quite a while before it hit the trough and then started coming up again. So you knew, you're in a pretty deep trough that was, more than, say, 100 feet or so. So they're pretty big swells. Unfortunately, it's only when they get really close together that you really start to get thrown about a lot. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter so much how big the swells are and how big the waves are if they're spread out, because then you're just roller coastering up and down. But when they're close, that's when you start getting a little bit of a little bit of a hiding.
The emotions very high on departure, just as high arriving at Rarotonga. How were you, as part of the crew, how were you guys able to work your way through that, get yourself back on task, to not worry too much about heading out into the unknown, and maintaining all that? And then the relief, I guess it's probably a form of relief once you get there and you make landfall.
It's a funny thing. You leave land, you go out into the ocean, And when you get out in the end of the ocean away from land, blue water they call it, it's a very different space. And initially, you can't stop yourself. Every time you wake, you start looking at the horizon for something to see, and there's nothing. But after a while, you get used to the idea that there's nothing, and you get used to, you kind of get to understand the concepts of the kore, the nothingness, the pull, the darkness, and you find a comfort zone within that. And if you don't find a comfort zone within that, whatever confusions are in your mind are going to come out, and you're going to lose the plot. And so those things did happen with a couple of people. But then when you eventually do see land, there's this huge well of disappointment that this journey is over. And it's a strange thing because, a few nanoseconds before that, you are dreaming of comfort, dry land, dry feet, dry body, food, things like that. But it's somehow when we saw the land, it was like one of the crew members, he turned around and said to, I think he said to Mo, he said, "Oh, well, we've seen it. Let's just carry on." Because there was a thing, once you've surrendered yourself to Tangaroa, it's a big thing to relinquish that again. And it makes you understand why on every destination throughout the Pacific, there's a little island called Motutapu. And we have one here in Tamaki. And it's on that island where those ceremonies and rituals of surrendering our dedication to Tangaroa and then turning to the land. It's where those rituals took place. And the same in Ngātangi, there's that little island there as well, and other places too. So, it's a funny thing, you're on the water, all you can think about is land. You finally get to see land and you think, oh, I don't want to leave the ocean now.
Kia ora, I'm just monitoring the Facebook comments here. We've got a question from someone in the audience there, Peter. When this film was originally shot, did it screen in cinemas or on TV? And what was the response like? And there's also a question about whether a narration was added for TV broadcast, and how did this change the film?
Good question, thank you. The narration, and thank you, Glynis Paraha, for your beautiful narration. I never liked the narration. When I make a film, I set out to tell a story with pictures, and I think that's all it really needed. I remember a few years ago, we had a screening at the museum, and the copy I got from the archives at that point didn't have the narration on it. And Heck turned to me after the screen and he said, "Oh, it's so much better without that voice on it." And I hadn't realized the voice wasn't there, but after he said that, I realized it wasn't there. And it just kind of works better without the voice because it lets you just experience the images you're watching rather than having a voice telling you what you're watching. So to my mind, it works better without the voice, but I know the voice does make it accessible for people. And so this is always the balance and craft that you make. It showed on TV, and that's why the voice was there. It was felt necessary for the gods of TV that there had to be a voice there, or people wouldn't understand what they're watching. They're strange gods, those gods that have a TV. But yeah, and so so it ended up with the voice. It never really got shown in cinemas except at film festivals, and it's shown at a number of film festivals around the world. And on a big screen, it works really well. It's really beautiful to watch.
Peter, Te Aurere is a response to other seafaring waka that have visited our shores. Hawaii Nui, with Greg Whakataka Brightwell, and of course Nainua bringing Hokole in. Where has the waka traditions in Aotearoa got to today?
It has grown exponentially. We have students of navigation, and I would venture to suggest we have a few fully qualified navigators in terms of celestial navigation. Some of those were on that original voyage of Odere. Some of them have learned in the ensuing years. A few years ago, a German philanthropist came here and built 7 waka out in Hobsonville, out of plywood, and he left those waka in various islands around the Pacific and created a resource for people to train and for people to voyage. And so there are many people who have voyaged, and people who have taken the experience of voyaging into their art, into their storytelling, into other things. And so many of those people might not ever become navigators, but they are people who understand the notions of navigation, of our traditional navigation, and can take that into their craft, into their other disciplines. Incidentally, one of our earliest wānanga in Tāmaki is the Pehe o Manuatere. Now, Manuatere is associated with the Tainui Waka, but he came before the Tainui Waka. He was someone who ventured without the need of a waka, but he was recognized as a master navigator, and his first wānanga was really about anchoring ourselves to this land with the knowledge we had of the stars, of the celestial progression. And that was over on Motutapu. Yeah, so to learn the art of celestial navigation is not something to only empower you to be a navigator or a voyager. It's something to empower you to understand the weather, the seasons, our vegetation, our marine life, and all of our species.
Well, I think that's one of the things that stand out for me. You have the knowledge of celestial navigation, but there's so many other benefits that come with it. Oceanography, as you say, environmental awareness. And Nainoa talks a lot about planet Earth being very much like a waka. We're not going to get off it. So we need to look after it as best we can. How much of that environmental resourcing and maintenance becomes part of being a crew member?
Becomes part of what, sorry?
Becomes part of being a member of a crew.
We didn't focus so much on that because our time was short. But certainly when we got onto the ocean, we got to see the impacts and the effects of having generations who really did not care for the ocean, who did not treat it with respect, who treated the ocean as the biggest garbage can in the world. And we still have that situation. And as we voyage, we learn more and more about the need to conscientize our populations so we don't keep using the oceans as our rubbish dumps.
Mm. So, Papa Heck brought a lot to the game. I mean, he and wasn't just out of personal interest. Why was it, do you think, that it was Papa Hector that was the chosen one?
This is a question I think he asked himself. And all he really had to go on was he was given that name, Heki Nuku Mai Ngā Iwi, which meant bringing the people together. And Heki Nuku Mai Ngā Iwi meant he had to reach out to the motu, not just the iwi of the north, and which is why he invited so many people from so many different iwi to come and participate in those wānanga and to come on the voyage. So he didn't know the answer to that question, and neither do I, but somebody recognized that when he was born and they gave him that name. And I think that's one of our traditions. You know, it's a tradition in Aotearoa, it's a tradition across the Pacific. the old people can recognize in the baby what their gift is going to be for the iwi and for the people. And so he was given that name. Heke nuku mai ngā iwi, the bringer together of all of the people.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of instances there. One is that, well, there are two examples of traditional knowledge meeting technology. First of all, the traditional knowledge of cutting the logs and the technical innovations that Hector was able to bring to that, to expedite and make the shaping of the hulls a lot faster. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there was Mal and his observations at odds with the technology that was available to them. Can you first of all talk about the meeting of traditional knowledge and the construction of Te Aurere, and then make a bit of a comment about the tradition of seafaring and relying on GPS and radars?
Okay, with the first part of that question, Heck had a strength which is still there in the north, and that is the people who remember the karakia and the practices of when we fell a tree for a purpose of. He reached into the ancient bag of knowledge, of wisdom, of customary practice, and conducted all of those things appropriate to the felling of a tree. Once he had done that, he was free to reach into his other toy bag and pull out of all of his other toys, but he had a whole lot. Not only did he have a whole lot, he had a capacity to adapt them, and the crew around him, you know, who are keen with their welding sets or whatever to make up jigs for running the chainsaw straight across the logs, for adapting a debarking machine into an adzing machine for shaping the hulls and such like that. And so because he had the anchors of tradition, it was very easy for him to nail those things down and then turn freely and unreservedly to the things that were going to help him achieve the outcome in the shortest amount of time. And so that was on the construction side of it. When it came to voyaging, we were all learning and we were new to the ocean, and we're sailing on our rum line straight towards Rarotonga, and everything seemed to be going very well. And Mo Kailung sat everybody down on the waka, and he sort of showed us a map where Rarotonga was, where we were, how we were sailing straight towards it, how this wind coming from this direction was giving us the momentum to get there. But he said, looking at the waves, and he showed us, it took me a while to really be able to see it, but a little ripple was coming over the waves that were already there, and that little ripple came from a wind that we could not feel yet. And that little ripple was going to grow because the wind behind it was strong. And now this is the kind of intelligence you get if you spend a lifetime on the ocean. We'd only been there 5 minutes, so we didn't really have that capacity to understand these things. And so when he explained a storm, and that we needed to use, we let the big one through, and then there'd be another one we could use to bring us back on course. Now, all of this sounded like pretty good, but then Kitty Kitty Radio had misread its own reports and consequently advised us that there was no storm coming. And so that created question marks for people, and in response to being questioned about this, Mo Piailong, with his humility, simply said, "Oh, it's your waka. You go whichever way you want to." And so, of course, we went straight smack bang into the middle of that big wind he was talking about, and it certainly was a big wind by the time it hit us. And by the time it hit us, we didn't have any option to get out of the way. And so we got a hiding, and we deserved it too. And I think we needed a hiding because we were green. We hadn't been on the ocean for a few generations. We needed to earn our stripes. And so, you know, that was 4 days of getting a hiding. And I think we did earn our stripes through that. And without that, you know, if it was just a plain sail all the way, it wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have anchored us properly. We needed to get a hiding. And I think we all need to get a hiding when we go out there, eh? And Taonga. Yeah.
I'm also aware that, you know, the building of the waka and getting it on the water is only part of the journey. That there's still a lot more learning to be done once the waka is on the water. There's learning the ropes, so to speak, but also getting the stomach for the sea. What are some of the things that you learned as part of accompanying Te Aurere to Rarotonga?
Well, the main thing I learned was when you get out on the ocean, when you get away from land, you get into blue water, there's nothing. And you just can't stop yourself. Every time you wake up, you scan the horizon looking for something. You want to see something, but there's nothing. And so after a while, you kind of get used to the idea that there's nothing. Now, if you go to sea with carrying a lot of baggage, with unresolved grief, with stuff in your head that doesn't really pertain to the voyage, it's going to come out, and it's going to be hard for you, and it's going to, in the really extreme times, it means you're probably going to lose the plot as well. And so it's really important in the preparation is that you resolve things. The ocean isn't a place to get away from things, and it's certainly not a place to get away from yourself. And being on a small boat means if you haven't sorted that stuff out, you're going to come into conflict within yourself, and that will spread to others around you.
Kia ora, Peter. Sorry for my interjection here, but we've got a couple more questions from the audience, and then we'll probably move to wrap up after that because we've got another screening for Dockage coming up. We have one from Ian Hutch here. Kia ora, Peter. How did you come to make the film with Heck?
I came to make the film with Heck because I'd made another film with Heck in 1990 when he built the Matatua 2 waka. And I mean, that was just a beautiful single hull waka. And so Heck invited myself and Ian Johns, who'd worked on the other 1990 waka project, Waka the Awakening Dream. And so Heck invited us. And so we, I mean, he invited us a few weeks before he was going to fell the log. So it wasn't long enough for us to get a budget together or anything like that. But we were so excited at the prospect of filming it that we just sort of begged and borrowed a little bit and asked a few favors and got up there with the crew and got the tree being felled and all of those ceremonies around it. And that was really the start of it. And so it was quite a few months later that we actually got a budget together and could start filming properly with the crew. But up until that time, we'd just, you know, go up there with a borrowed camera and a bit of old stock we had from other projects. And mostly, I think that's how a lot of documentaries start. You start with the intention, not with the budget, and you worry about the budget later.
Apai, and we have an inquiry about the restoration or the archiving process here. Lawrence, perhaps you could speak to that and then you could help wrap us up.
Sure. So as part of the restoration program, we were able to go back to as close to original source of content that was available to us in the main 1-inch video. It was a matter of going back to that file source putting it through the scanning or the scanners and equipment that we have here at Taonga, that is able to tidy up some of the digital noise, reconstitute some of the pixels that have been lost, but also the sound. We're able to work with the sound there. The copy that we did have, I believe we only had one soundtrack, sorry, that both the narration and the effects have been mixed down to one track. So it made it a little bit hollow. What we're able to do then is just duplicate, so we have two channels of sound to enhance the sound a lot more. But certainly in the way that we collect things is, first of all, we'll take the original material. We will then strike a preservation and duplication copy of that. The original that we receive gets put away. The idea is for us not to have to access it again. For the preservation copy, that sits there in case something occurs with the duplication copy. So what we're able to do, and it's a lot of, it has been a lot of technical innovation over the past 15, 20 years that has seen us being able to go back to that source material. Each time you play something, of course, you lose the generation, or you lose some of the emulsion from the tape. So it's about being able to reconstitute as much of that information into a digital package and then make it available again for audiences. So it's not an easy process, neither is it cheap. We recently, people will be aware that we received an injection of funds that we in our town are going to be able to get on with the task of digitising our moving image heritage. And so we would like to have thought that we've gone into our wages. We really do need to put that money where it sits best, and that is to ensure that the content that we have is stable as possible, that we're able to make that content available, which is one of our main briefs. It's not just to collect and make sure that the material is safe and well, but also to share it with as wide an audience as possible. And avenues like DocEdge absolutely give us that ability to do that. In the post-COVID-19 world, we see we're here now on the internet, still being able to engage with the content and still being able to enjoy comments from the director and other people who are involved in the production of it. So I really do want to shout out to DocEdge for, as I said at the beginning, giving the opportunity for this material to be shared again. I also want to acknowledge Peter, your involvement in waka, and not just waka, in politics, even wider than Aotearoa, up into the Pacific. I'm aware of your piece, Hotu Painu, and other projects that you've been involved in. And so I really want to tip my hat to you for your skill and craft that you bring into storytelling, and that we're still able to engage with that content again and again. But before I do close off, Peter, is there any last words that you want to share with the audience? Okay. Right then, once again, thank you everybody for participating. I want to thank DocEdge, as I said, for giving us the possibility of screening the material again. Peter Ture and Ian John for their generosity in allowing us to once again engage with the Taonga called Kupe Voyaging by the Stars. I want to also acknowledge technical support and help from DocEdge and my colleagues here at Taonga Sound and Vision. But more than anything, I also want to acknowledge the contribution that our Papa Hector made and gave to the project. Papa Hector, Maupiailung, Papa Simon Snowden, Hilda Busby, Paul and Noel, Clay Burton. These people have all passed who were part of the crew, so I want to acknowledge them. I also want to acknowledge each and every one of you who have participated by coming along and engaging. I know that for a fact that Peter doesn't do this stuff lightly. He commits himself to it, and for that commitment, Peter, tēnā mihi kawana ki a koe. Last but not least, I just really want to farewell those who have passed since the beginning of the project. Ke koutou, me haere koutou ki tua paira ki putahitanga rehua, me noho pai ai koutou ki wainginu i a rātou o te wāhingaro, e moe. Apati hono tātai hono, ko rātou te hungo mati ki a rātou, apati hono tātai hono, ko tātou te hungo re hui mai nei tēnei wā, tēnei ngā mihi kawana ki tātou katoa, tēnā koutou, na hora mai a koutou kāinga maha, huri no te motu, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora.